You are listening to the Pilgrim on the 405 with Will Crist. Join him as he and his guests discover how businesses thrive in California.
Well, welcome to the Pilgrim on the 405 on this bright, sunshiny day in Southern California. We are going to have a great conversation today with my longtime friend, Karen Williams, who is the CEO of 211. And I want Karen to welcome Karen to the Pilgrim on the 405. I want you to tell us, what is 211?
Oh, thanks so much, Will, for having me, and thanks for giving me this opportunity to share with the community what we do. 211, if you think about it in a nutshell, provides hope to people when they're looking for help to navigate the system of the different programs and services here in Orange County. What does that mean? What that means is that when you're in a crisis situation, and I think very realistically, we kind of joke about it, but we say everybody's only 6 seconds away from a crisis, right? It could be that a car stops suddenly and you bump into them, or you could have a child who ends up getting injured somehow. You could have a situation where you've got a sister who is in a domestic violence situation and doesn't know where to go. You could have a cousin who's a veteran who's having a problems reentering into the community. You could know somebody in your neighborhood who has a family member who has become homeless because they've lost their job. What 211 does, and strictly by dialing the number 2-1-1, it's the same thing as dialing 911, you get connected to us, and we have access to over 3,000 programs here in Orange County. They run the gamut from connecting people to shelter programs if they're looking for housing, to connect those who are part of a domestic violence situation to a program that can keep them safe and secure. We can connect people to transportation options in the community, legal services, just about everything.
Well, where did 211 come from?
Well, the genesis of 211 is really an interesting one. Here in Orange County, we actually started in 1984, 35 years ago, when a number of the hospitals saw that there was a need for a way to connect people to the health and human services here in Orange County. However, the 211 number actually came about in 2004 when a number of what we call ourselves information referral specialists across the state got together and petitioned the California PUC to get the number. So there is a 211 in every community here in Orange County. We've got 97% coverage, I think, within the state of California. There's one up in LA County, Riverside, San Bernardino, San Diego, and obviously Orange County, etc. What each of the individual 211s do is they get to know the community resources and make sure that they have a good idea of what type of programs are offered and who they can see. It's to help streamline the path to the appropriate resource. Interestingly enough, 211 as a whole really took off in 2005 when Hurricane Katrina hit. And when I talk 211 as a whole, I mean nationwide. And when that situation occurred, and it's no different than here in California if we have an earthquake or wildfires, right? You have people who've never needed to tap into the social services safety net who all of a sudden need to figure out how to get help because they've lost their home. They can't move back into their home for whatever reason. United Way saw down in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina that there was a need to build this into more of a robust system in the country. So there are 240 211s. Of those, half of them are what I would call owner-operated by the United Way, by the local United Ways. The rest of us are independently run, but we all have a good relationship with the local United Way.
Well, I'm curious about what we did before we needed 211. I'm assuming that there was a time before 211 where there was a need.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to push back before that,
Mm-hmm.
before there was a need. How did these social traumas, how did we deal with them then?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. So this is pre 1984. Are you thinking? So
Yes.
before that? So I think obviously it has something to do with our social services network, right? I think that there was a stronger sense of community and neighborhood. One of the things I found so interesting here in Orange County is if you go back to pre the beginning of our organization in 84, I think there were maybe 1 million people living here in Orange County.
Mm-hmm.
The 34 cities, towns operated very independently. There were geographic barriers between them. But I think that within each of the communities, they operated fairly independently, and they relied on themselves. So if you think about it, much more of a neighborhood network.
Mm-hmm.
With the expansion, of course, we're over 3 million people here, and that growth came pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
And so you think about the stress on the system. Um, I think we're just at the point now as a community that we really are building out systems of care, which is always a challenge, right? Because you have people who are still very familiar with operating things independently, who are now having to work in a collaborative way. But I do think societally, if we take a look at it, I mean, for me, one of the things I really see is with the growth that we're seeing with baby boomers becoming our elderly now, and the stress on the system, what we're calling our silver tsunami, that we're really concerned about people losing their housing because of one their partner spouse dies, and now they're down to one social security monthly check. They don't have the two, and people are no longer living with their family. Yeah.
They're no longer living with their family. And what I'm curious about is, do they even have a relationship with their family?
Right. Well, that's a good point. I mean, I anecdotally, just for myself, I have a father who's 93, or about to turn 93, who lives in Colorado. And he still is living on his own, very independent. He's great health. His doctor told him he physiologically is that of a 75-year-old, which is great. But we've had conversations about him moving out here with us. And I've had friends, and I'm talking friends who are seniors themselves, who have said, oh, you don't want to do that because it's as if it would disrupt your life. Well, I come from a family where we do that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't even cross my mind not to do that. But I think that's the exception versus the rule, at least here in California. I don't know if it's true across the country, but at least here in Orange County.
Well, I have heard about the baby boomers being the sandwich generation.
Mm-hmm.
We find ourselves in a place where we're helping our children,
Mm-hmm.
and through them our grandchildren,
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time we're paying attention to our parents.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is a part of a community
Mm-hmm.
that deals with issues here. And now when things get out of hand,
Mm-hmm.
or more than we have either the resources or the contact with
Mm-hmm.
resources to deal with, it would seem to me then something like 211 would become very important,
Mm-hmm.
almost like a safety net, but not the place of first, the first place we're going to call.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to look at each other. We're going to
Mm-hmm.
be dealing with the family, and I'm wondering if that's what was then,
Mm-hmm.
and that there was a process of, I don't know, a lot of people moving in without their families
Mm-hmm.
to California, a lot of immigrants coming.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if part of providing resources is also providing a path back to the development of community.
Yeah, I mean, I think having a path back to the development of community is very important. I would say that where we function as a safety net, as an example, would be if you have somebody who has senior parents, but they don't know that they can sign up for CalFresh,
Yes.
and they could get an additional $50 that would help them towards their groceries. Or they might be looking for senior daycare, if you will, and they want to make sure that their parent is taken care of during the day by going someplace. We can connect to those resources. We have a fabulous new program called 211 Ride. So if someone has a computer, they can just log on to 211ride.org, or they can call us. But it actually taps into all the transportation, multi-county, LA, Riverside, San Bernardino, and Orange County, that taps into what it will cost if you take a bus, what the routes are, the train, etc. And are there nonprofits who can actually come to you to pick you up, or with the OCTA, with our bus system, if you actually need to have somebody who can take a wheelchair or needs to walk you up to the door, a demand response. I think the adult children of those seniors would be glad to know that there's that kind of resource, right? One of the things I found when I talk to baby boomers who are part of that sandwich generation is that they need to know that 211 is across the country. So if they have a call from an adult child who has come to rely on them strictly for financial support, there is a little bit of pushback where you can say, why don't you call your local 211 and see if they can get you connected to some help?
Right.
Which is a lovely thing to be able to do.
Right. And Mary, my wife Mary, in Riverside at St. Michael's Church, in that outreach ministry that she's been doing there for 7 years, there's a tremendous amount of helping people to learn that there are many resources for them, helping them to find jobs, helping them to find housing, and tapping into the city of Riverside in this particular case, because there are resources there that people who are on the streets may not be aware of at all. Now, I'm wondering that about providing resources, which is absolutely necessary, important, and vital. At the same time, resources are not enough. And I'm wondering where that community formation is. Now, when I was growing up, back way before the internet, church was a place of not only providing resources and relationships, but it was a place of learning how to relate. And it was a place where, at best, the church community would say, here are better ways of relating to each other so you can meet some needs out there. And I'm wondering where we do that today.
Well, especially in a multi-generational,
Diverse cultural, yet we're all living in this soup called Southern California. And I'm just wondering, where does that happen for people? Where do they begin to learn how to support each other, not necessarily in giving rides, but how they to incorporate people into community?
Well, I think there are some real strong connections that we carry forth with us, right? Or learning how to do things. So, I'm a preacher's kid, PK, and we moved several times when I was growing up. And so from that upbringing, one of the things I learned was how important it was to get to know your neighborhood. And my parents really understood that. So church was always a part of it. But my main growing up years, it was a campus ministry. So it wasn't really, there weren't other kids, etc. So the neighborhood was very important. When my husband and I moved back to Southern California back in '97, it was very, very important for us to find a neighborhood that functioned as a neighborhood where you knew your neighbors. And the neighborhood we live in is just fabulous. I mean, we have people who've lived there for 25, 30 years. They raise their children there. We have grandparents to age, people who are in their 80s and 90s who live there. We have young families there. It's a really wonderful blend. We have people who come from all parts of the world. It's very, very diverse. But we get together every Memorial Day, 4th of July, Labor Day, and New Year's Eve. That's a standing thing that we do every single year. And we are all there for each other and get together other times loosely and arrange type of things. But we've come to rely on each other.
And when someone new moves into the neighborhood,
You bring them into the fold.
you do something
Yeah.
to say, we see you, and we are here.
Yeah.
Now, I just got off the phone before I came to the show with a friend of mine who is now living in San Francisco. He was in Chicago, and he was asking me, he said, we're living in San Francisco, and we're living in the Tenderloin. Because that's where the law school is my wife is going to. And he said, now in Chicago, I would carry around McDonald's, $10 McDonald's gift cards. And when I saw somebody on the streets, I would hand them one. And he said, now, I'm here in California, in San Francisco, and when I tried that, the people that I tried to looked at me and said, why are you doing that? And he said, I have a heart for these folks, and I don't know what to do.
Well, the thing that so you're saying that the person who's on the street doesn't want to receive?
Did not want to receive, and what I'm wondering is, with this homelessness, and he said it's increased by 30% in the last 2 years in San Francisco. I'm wondering if we have in our minds, when we lost community to a large extent, and you're talking about places where there is community, I'm wondering if when someone is homeless that they become part of another community
Absolutely.
separate from us.
Absolutely.
All right, now that is a divide. And to me, when people will talk about how we are politically and economically divided, I think we're also socially divided because we begin to say, well, they're not one of us because they don't have a mortgage, and so what I'm wondering, what he asked me was, what do I do? And I said, the first thing you have to do is you have to build a relationship.
Absolutely, and absolutely. I want to share a story with you that something that has happened a number of times for me. One of the things that you see when people around homeless folk is that they are fearful. And what I say is have a conversation. So if there's somebody standing outside my grocery store and I see them there, I will typically stop and I will reach out my hand and say, my name is Karen, what's yours? They'll hesitantly take my hand but give me their hand and give me their name. And then I'll say, tell me your story. What's going on for you and how are you here? And what I found that's so incredible, besides the fact that we can have this dialogue and then I can perhaps provide some direction and information to this individual, people coming out of the grocery store will reach into their sack of food, will give them something, they'll give them money, but just by the fact that I'm standing there makes it safer for them to come and have that interaction.
Well, let's talk about that. What is it that causes us to fear the other that looks, is it the looks, unshaven, hair messed up, clothes not tidy?
I think it's bigger than that. I mean, I think that might be on a very basic level, but I think there's a bigger fear of, I don't know what to do, how to help this person.
But that's the question that I have with that's what I was talking with my friend in San Francisco, is if I believe that I am here to help them, that must mean that they can't help themselves.
So for some people, there are some people who prefer, very few, but there is a small percentage who are not going to want your help or my help,
Right, right.
right? Especially the people who have learned to live on the street and they have a community. I mean, that's part of the problem you see when people are broken apart and now moved into emergency shelter, like we did along the river trail, right?
Right,
They had built their community
right.
and it was something that was safe for them. Um, One of the nonprofits here had told me I was very interested in their direct mail campaign. And I said, it's so interesting to me that your pieces never show a mother and a child on the outside envelope when that is who you serve primarily.
Hmm.
You always have a guy. And what I was told was that when they have test marketed it,
Hmm.
when they have a grizzled old guy on the front of it, everybody has an uncle, a great uncle, somebody that they've got somewhere in their family sphere that they know like that they will say, okay, I need to donate money because this person needs help.
Hmm.
But when it shows a mother and a child, it scares people because it could be them.
Mm.
Isn't that interesting?
Could be.
I,
That
I
could be.
thought that was so fascinating.
It's sort of there for the grace of God go I.
That's it.
Well, but to me, again, all of the resources that we put toward the other are very important.
Hmm.
I just wonder where we develop the relationship that is probably the most valuable thing about being a human being.
Hmm.
Because if I don't if because of trauma or abuse, physical, emotional, or sexual in my childhood, I have difficulty relating to other people, how do I get beyond that?
Hmm.
And it's the extreme would be mental illness,
Hmm.
but most of us are living in that range.
Right.
And I'm just wondering what we in this community, how we welcome people into the community,
Hmm.
how we show people how to well, respect would be one, but how to interact with people.
Hmm.
I mean, I just imagine seeing someone who is different, is homeless, and sometimes has a sign out there saying, "I, need this for my child, or for this or that or the other." It's certainly important to share resources, but it seems to me that it's also important to share the respect that one would give another human being to hear their stories.
Hmm.
And I wonder how often we really do that.
I'm going to say for those who are not outreach workers, I would say it's probably fairly rare. I think you can even take it back to how many of us, when we're in a retail situation, say please and thank you to the person who's serving us.
Hmm.
I mean, it gets to that point. It used to be that the interconnection between people was so much stronger. And it might be because somebody knew your parents or they knew your sister or whatever. There was some kind of familial or neighborly, connection. But I think that both the fact everybody's moved along, is moving at such a quick pace and have forgotten some just basic relationship components. I will also tell you one of the things that's interesting, and I would found it to be very educational for me personally and for our staff. A number of years ago, when we were doing the point in time count, we actually hired homeless folks not just for the day of the count, but we hired them to come in and work in our office. And so they were with us for about 4 months of time. And these were people who were either living in emergency shelters or out on the street. And what we found was, to me, you could almost see coming into an environment where it was almost like muscle memory. You could see them say, okay, I've been in a normal place before. I can do this, but not have the stress on them during the day of figuring out where to get water, where to get coffee,
Mm-hmm.
where to use the bathroom, not having to deal with any of that, and they were in a safe environment. It was incredible, and we were able to teach them some office skills, Word, Excel, whatever things that we needed help with, and it was tools that they could take with them. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
pleased to say several of those folks, and not only were able to get housed to permanent housing, but we're also able to get jobs. I mean, you think about it, of the people that we have that are homeless, if we just did a buddy up system, what we could do.
Well, uh, what Mary's experience in Riverside was, she had a dream of taking St. Michael's Church. It has a particularly large um, aisle.
Mm-hmm.
It has French doors on one side all the way down, but it's a large aisle on one side of the church. And her dream, literally a dream, was that there would be long tables all the way through with tablecloths and candles and
Mm-hmm.
flowers for people to
Mm-hmm.
come and have dinner
Mm-hmm.
on a Thursday night. Well, she made that happen. She brought that to
Mm-hmm.
be. But she said, this is not going to be us feeding them.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be them feeding each other.
Mm-hmm.
And we are part of that,
Mm-hmm.
them.
Mm-hmm.
And so she helped them get food handlers licenses. She
Mm-hmm.
found people who were felons coming out of prison but happened to be cooks
Mm-hmm.
and knew how to cook for 200 people. And so after 7 years of that group functions on
Mm-hmm.
their own. It
Mm-hmm.
is their place.
Mm-hmm.
And I just find that so important. It's certainly necessary to hand out all the food that they get. Tons of food
Mm-hmm.
from all the places in Riverside, from UC Riverside, from the School for the Deaf. All these places have all this food that they don't know what to do with.
Mm-hmm.
So they bring it to St. Michael's, and it gets dispersed in various places, all the way from the high desert to the river bottom to people who just drive up and want food. But it was never us doing it for them, and that to me is a key issue, because when we talk about divide, it's not just money.
Mm-hmm.
It's a divide about us and them, the other. And I'm just wondering how, when people have needs, how we avoid only treating the symptoms and not treating the underlying piece as well.
Right. It's the holistic piece, right? It's really the holistic piece. We found with this point in time count that I was mentioning, what we did is we said the same thing. It's everybody counts. It's not us versus them. We're doing this together. And they
Mm-hmm.
actually helped plan the count. They called themselves the pit crew.
Mm-hmm.
For the point in time, right? The pit crew, and we had T-shirts made, and very, very engaged and involved. It's how you become part of the solution. Everybody becomes part of the solution, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which therefore has so much more meaning.
Well, one of the pieces of this relationship puzzle was brought home to me by Paula Kaplan. Paula has a project with Harvard. She is a psychiatrist, and teaches psychiatrists. And what she wrote a book called When Johnny and Jane Come Marching Home, and it was about PTSD. And she and I have come very close in understanding something that she learned, which was very often PTSD is really a separation, a divide. I am so different, so broken, that I cannot function the way that I did before. And she says the way to deal with a returning soldier, men and women, is to listen to them. And she said, here's the protocol. It's not that difficult. You don't have to have a degree to do it. She said, what happens very often when a soldier comes home is someone will say, well, what was it like? And they will just begin to tell the story. And the one who asked says, oh, I don't want to hear anymore. That's enough. Which communicates you are broken. You are different. You do not belong in this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, if we were to, each of us, when they come home, to say to them, look, I have 3, 5 hours, whatever it takes. I want to hear your story from the beginning, whatever you will share with me, all the way to the end. And she said, what will happen, what does happen, is that they'll begin telling the story, and someplace along the line, they will tell something that is just horrendous. And that's the place for the listener who has been listening all along to say something along the lines of, you know, if I were in your shoes then, I would have done the same thing. You're not crazy. She said, that's the turning point. That's when they are welcomed home. She said, until we can do that, drugs won't help. Housing won't help. AA won't help. They might bandage the wound, but they don't really address it. And I've just found that to be so powerful. And that's what I'm looking for, is when people are manifesting the symptoms of isolation, the symptoms of don't know how. I'm wondering how we as a community, and I appreciate the various 211 communities around the country, but how do we recognize that these are symptoms? The reality is they're missing community.
Right.
What do we do to encourage them, help them to become aware of it, to recognize, you know, if I were in your shoes, I'd be doing the same thing. You're not crazy.
I think that within the veteran population, and that is a segment, if you will, there is a really wonderful program here in Orange County. The Orange County Community Foundation about 5 years ago did a study on veterans in terms of demographics and taking a look at Orange County. And the outcome from that, other than the report, was to start funding some nonprofits with the goal of having them work together collaboratively. And we were one of the recipients of the grants. And the first thing we did is we sublet some of our space to the VOA LA for their Battle Bridges program. And we wanted to have them located with us so that when we were on the phone, we had veterans who were on the phone, when they knew that they needed to have further help navigating the system for housing or jobs or whatever, we could give them, connect them over to VOA. Since then, the program has got to the point where we're now co-located with it's VOA LA Goodwill, 0800 and 211 Orange County. We're co-located at the Tierney Center at Goodwill. And what it's become is a place for veterans and their families to come. And part of that is building that relationship so you can have the face-to-face. So the question is that something then you can go ahead and, you know, move around, really use as a model for different populations. I would say within the outreach workers that are out there working with the homeless community, my guess is that that there's some of that going on. I know for ourselves, one of the things that we found is sometimes when I say we provide hope to people, once they get connected to us, they can, one, talk to us. We're not on and off the phone like we don't have time to talk to you, because we're really interested in all the components of what they're going through. We know that food sometimes is or lack of food might be a driving issue for them. But for them to know that they can just call and talk to somebody because they've got relatives who said, enough is enough, I can't deal with this anymore, they can talk to us. And we're not going to be judgmental.
Well, that whole way of helping people to recognize you're not broken.
Right.
I mean, that's an incredible step for many people when they look out on any one of a number of situations, but just use homelessness. They look out on homelessness and think that is a problem. You know, Mary has just finished up her 27 years at California Baptist University and gone on to, she is now on the presiding bishop's staff of the Episcopal Church as the coordinator for Indigenous ministry, coordinator for Indigenous theological education. And so we were looking, she shared with me some of the video coming from the Anglican Church in Canada, which is light years ahead of where we are in 48 in dealing with indigenous populations. And one of the things that one of the elders, one of the native elders said was, "We are not a problem.
Good for them.
We are an opportunity for a relationship."
Mm-hmm.
And I just wonder if that's how we could look at more of the issues in the various levels, all the way through politics and economics and money and all of these places where there is division. I'm just wondering if we could see that as not a problem to be solved, but more of a relationship to be discovered.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I agree with you. I mean, I think if you look at societally for us, and I'm a baby boomer,
Mm-hmm.
we have been in an environment that has not been a manufacturing, farming environment.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't been making things. What we've been doing is consuming things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even after 9/11 happened,
You want to do something?
President
by.
Bush said, "Go by," right?
Right.
I mean, and so that piece of it, I think, really helped break apart, some of the relationship piece. We no longer were working to solve a problem together. We were no longer working to, plant crops and, bring food to market.
Which are all things you can't do alone,
Things that you can't do alone. That's correct.
but you can consume alone.
You can consume alone. That's exactly right. And don't we have a lot of people consuming alone
Yeah,
now, right?
yeah.
Which is part of the problem. So now I think we're into the second and third generation. So now you've got parents who don't know how to have a relationship, who are raising children, so they don't know how to have a relationship, and they're having children, right? So you have that ongoing piece that continues on. I even think that we had a niece come out to California about 20 years ago to live with us. She wanted to go to school down in San Diego. And it was so interesting. She was 18. And for 10 years of her life, the TV show Friends was on.
Mm-hmm.
And I really was struck by how that was her reality. Whereas when I was a child, what was on was Rawhide,
Mm-hmm.
Bonanza, things that you knew, this isn't real.
Mm-hmm.
This is fantasy land, right? And
Leave It to Beaver.
Leave It to Beaver.
and the model for Leave It to Beaver was 19th Street in Costa Mesa.
Really?
That's where the houses that they
Yeah.
used for the model.
For the model. But somewhere in there, it was a sense of that's not necessarily a real world. It was a real, and you can talk about teamwork and all that kind of stuff that goes on in some of those subplots. But the point being was that her growing up here is from 8 to 18 was about a bunch of people who sat around in an apartment together,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it was her expectations of what life should be when you got an apartment was so different than mine. It's kind of akin to when we were growing up, you didn't have Targets around, right? So when you were getting ready to go to college or have your first apartment, you went to yard sales, right? So we interacted with each other. You bought pots and pans for 25 cents, right? And now mom and dad go off to Target and buy you everything that you need and bring it. So there's there's something there that has really
probably have
broken
it drop shipped.
Probably now have it drop shipped even more so, right? So I mean, and there's some pluses and minuses to everything, but I do think that we are at the end, hopefully at a turning point where we're saying, gee, there are a lot of things that have not happened, that we've made some shifts and we need to get back to the relationship. I also think part of it for yourself, myself, yours obviously with your career background, for myself, just I'd say more age, you grow up and you start realizing that that just barreling ahead. You need to step back and say, wait a second, what are we here for? And one of the scariest leaps of faith, I do think, for people is to all of a sudden stop and say, oh, worldly possessions are not everything, because that's what we're told. You know, when we have commercials where you're tying up cars with bows for Christmas.
Well, the one who dies with the most toys wins.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So when you get to the point of saying, I can't take it with me, does it really matter? As long as I have a roof over my head and food to eat, can take care of myself. You've got all those, but do I really need all this excess? And then what does that mean? And then to see how people react.
But that to me is a way of getting rid of things. But it's what do I really need?
Right.
And what do they really need?
Sharing.
Is relationship.
Right.
And so one of the things that when we had Nicole Sudium on from Goodwill, was one of her hopes was to have you and several other people on one show where we could all talk about not how do we coordinate our services, but what are the issues that we see out there. And we talked about relationships. So just getting that kind of conversation going. So would you be willing to come back?
Absolutely. That would be lovely.
So we can schedule that with her and just get together and have a conversation about what does it mean to build a community. What does it mean to welcome people into relationship? What does it mean? And that's what I told my friend from San Francisco. He said, what can I do? And I said, well, what I would suggest that you do is that you greet them as a neighbor. And you ask them if you could sit down and have some coffee with them. And you might tell them that, you really have no idea what their life is like and you want to know. And I said, you may have people who scowl at you and say, I don't want that. But if you keep looking, you will find people. And as you begin doing that, you will learn a lot about who they are, what they want, not necessarily what they need, because that would be your ego getting involved, but just to listen and build a relationship. Because, like it or not, that tent on the street housing a homeless person is your neighbor.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I also think if there's a silver lining in all of this, I think that there are plenty of people who would be willing to participate in this. It's showing a road. It's kind of taking the roadmap and figuring out what that is and what does this mean, and having something that other people can do as well. Some of the little keys, like you were saying with Mary, with her church, that it wasn't about us serving them, but it's all of us in this together. Makes such a difference.
Maybe we could take the Good Samaritan parable and simply change the characters from Good Samaritan to the homeless person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had a very interesting situation a couple of years ago where I was doing the watch on a Monday, Thursday, into Good Friday at my church, and I had, the 5 o'clock stint. And when I came in, there were two women who were there who were coming off their hour, and there was a homeless couple asleep in the pews. And so they were wondering if I'd be okay by myself, and I said, I'll be fine. And I ended up staying a couple of shifts. And then when they awoke, I talked to them. Same thing. It's building that relationship. Found out what their story was, what was going on, and then ended up taking them to a place that they needed. The only thing that I did was judgmental on it at all with them. As I said, I know you're probably not going to listen to me about this, but I said, quit smoking. I used to smoke, and it's the stupidest thing I've ever done in my life. I said, I know I sound like your mother, but I'm just telling you. But with that, it's that sense of once again, it's building that relationship.
Yeah.
I hope that for our organization, if we are able to help people at all, it's for them to understand they can come to us to help find their way, right? It's to be able to provide some of that navigation, and just to know that we've got so many wonderful resources in the community. But I do think that the relation piece is the key.
Yeah. Well, thank you for taking your time to be with us. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I look forward to having you back with Nicole and other leaders like yourself in the community.
Yeah, maybe we can crack the code on this.
Well,
that'd be great.
We certainly take some steps in that
Yeah.
way. So, what would you like to say to the community who's going to be listening to this?
I would say that we are available to you as a resource 24/7, 365 days a week. We're multilingual. You can also find us on the web at 211oc.org, and you can actually self-navigate if you want to find resources. You don't necessarily need to talk to us, but we're there willing to help. And know that out there in this community, there is somebody out there who can provide you the help and hope that you need for either yourself or a loved one. We're here.
Great. That's wonderful. So glad that you could be with us today, Karen. And this is one other example of how people from the top to the bottom, from the east to the west and the north to south in California, learn to thrive.
Thank you.
You've been listening to The Pilgrim on the 405 with Will Crist. To hear more of the programs in this podcast, go to www.willchrist.com.